Hello, so I hope you've all had a lovely Easter and are getting back into the swing of working from home. As you'll know, because I've set you on Show My Homework for the past two lessons, some pre-reading and some work on BBC Bite Size on some images from the textbook, that this video today is going to be on the resurrection and ascension of Jesus. So just to recap, over the last couple of lessons, we've been having a look at Christian beliefs, and as part of that, we've had a look at the death of Jesus, and we know that the death and the resurrection and the ascension, all of this element of Jesus, is the most kind of written about sections in the Bible. So they're really significant, all three of these things. So Jesus' death, resurrection and ascension are incredibly important, which is why they are perhaps the lengthiest sections of Jesus's life explained in the Bible. But we've also had a look at things like the atonement, where the idea that Jesus and his crucifixion formed a bit of a bridge. So again, I can go back to a couple of lessons if you wanted to, but I remember drawing on one of those PowerPoints that I've put on YouTube for you, a bit like two different islands, and the cross where Jesus was crucified formed the bridge where Christians can then kind of be atoned and at one with God again. So we had a look at atonement, we've had a look at the ideas of the Trinity, and we've had a look at the ideas of the Incarnation. So just as a reminder as well, the Trinity is tri, meaning three, and un, so triune, meaning one. So the Trinity is the idea that God has three different parts or elements to him in one, because obviously Christianity is a monotheistic religion. And that's why Jesus is fully God, but is also fully human. So we've had a look at this when we've had a look at the ideas of the Incarnation. So I'm not going to explain too much more about that today. And if you are a little bit confused, please go back and have a look at some of the other YouTube videos that I've put online for you. But it's just really important that you do understand that he was fully God and fully human, because he needed to be human to be able to make God personable to Christians, but he also needed to be fully human so that he felt the pain and the sacrifice of his crucifixion, to be able to atone and kind of save us from our original sin, from Adam and Eve. So, resurrection and ascension, what are they? So have a look on the next slide. These are all the key words for the next few parts of this lesson. Resurrection has two different definitions for the AQA exam board. So the first definition is the idea that you are risen from the dead. But not only that you're just rising from the dead, but that you are in a body which is perfect. Okay, so if you died with some sort of disease or died with an ailment or an illness, when you are resurrected, you are formed again as a perfect human being. And then two, Jesus is rising from the dead on Easter Sunday, which obviously we've just had, an event which is recorded in all four Gospels and a central part of Christianity. Now, I know I've spoken to you about the Gospels in previous videos, but they are from Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and they are disciples of Jesus. And I'm going to give you a task a bit later on related to these Gospels. Ascension, if you split this word into two, so if you have a look at the ascen section comes from the root word is ascend. Now, if you ascend something, it means that you go up. Okay, so descend means going down, ascend means going up. So the ascension comes from the word ascend, and it's the idea that 40 days after the resurrection of Jesus, he ascended, he went back up to heaven to be with God the Father. So the life of Jesus incarnate ceased to exist because he had resurrected and he had ascended to be back to being this transcendent kind of God figure. He no longer needed to be the incarnate version of God. And then obviously heaven, which is something you're probably all familiar with, is a state of eternal happiness in the presence of God, and the place of eternal peace ruled over by God. So it's somewhere where you are going to be forever, and it's somewhere where you're going to be forever happy and forever with God. So it's a real kind of goal for Christians to be able to get there at the end of their life. What I want to do, or what I want you to do, just to really make sure that over the past couple of lessons we've cemented the ideas of his death, and the ideas of the Trinity and the Incarnation and atonement and reconciliation and all that kind of stuff. There are 3 videos here that I want you to recap and watch, and I will link these videos on to Show My Homework so that you can just click on there to get the quick access to the videos rather than having to type the URL in. But the first video is about the Last Supper and the arrest of Jesus. So just before he was put on trial and just before he died. And then the second video is to do with Jesus's death, and then the third video, sorry, my bullet point number thing's gone slightly out of whack there, but the third video is to do with Jesus's resurrection. Each video is only about 90 seconds long, so it won't take you very long to watch. And again, if there are any gaps in your knowledge or anything that you're not particularly sure about, it'd be a good idea to make a few notes. And again, I'm always on my emails, so if you are struggling with this content, please email me, and you can find my email address on Show My Homework, because I know that Christianity can sometimes be a little bit difficult, because it can be a little bit confusing, and there are elements of faith which there are no concrete, solid, clear answers for it. That's why it's called a faith. So have a quick watch of those and add to your notes if you're unsure about anything. A few points that I really want to make you aware of, though, was that Jesus was crucified on the Good Friday. So obviously that's something we've just had, and I remember mentioning to you in my previous video, Good Friday is really important in the Christian calendar, and because it's the day that Jesus was crucified, lots of Christians choose not to eat meat on Good Friday, because obviously it's a way of showing respect for the death that kind of Jesus had. After Jesus' death, he was placed in a tomb with a large stone rolled in front of it to deter grave robbers, because hundreds of thousands of years ago, quite often people would rob graves because people were buried with their riches and their wealth, so that they could have a good afterlife. And then 3 days after his burial, so we're now on the Sunday, when some women came to visit Jesus' body, they realised that Jesus was no longer there. And this is because Jesus had resurrected. So it took 3 days for the resurrection of Jesus to actually happen. And I've just put in italics here, there's a quote from Jesus. Jesus was telling people, he was preaching to people that he was going to be resurrected. And he was saying things like, the Son of Man must be handed over to the sinners, be crucified, and 3 days later rise to life. So that was a teaching of Jesus. It's a really good quote to kind of try and remember elements of if you can. But I'm going to break it down for you. So the Son of Man, now Jesus is called many different things. So he's called Jesus, he's called the Word, because he's spreading the word of Christianity, but he's also called the Son of Man because he's here to help mankind. And as we know, Jesus must pay that ultimate sacrifice. And that's what it means here by saying he must be handed over to the sinners. Because as we all know, at the very, very beginning of Christianity in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were told not to eat from the tree of knowledge, but they did eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, which is where sin entered into the world. So because of that, the relationship between humans and God was broken. And that's where a couple of lessons ago I drew that image where you had kind of one island on the left hand side where humans were, and then one island on the right hand side where God was, and there was a big kind of gap and a big void in the middle. So because of original sin, and where Adam and Eve ate the apple, the relationship between God and humans was broken. and nobody could get over to reach God. So Jesus, the incarnated version of God, had to be handed over to the sinners. He had to die to try and save people. That's why he's so important in something called salvation, which is where Jesus saved Christians. He saved humanity. He's atoned God and humanity, and he's reconciled that relationship again. And then 3 days later, 3 days after his crucifixion, he must rise to life again. So not only was Jesus preaching this before his death, this then became a reality. So this helped people to understand that Jesus really was the Son of God. All these things that he was saying when he was alive, which lots of people didn't like him for because it was going against the empire at the time, it made sure that people understood that actually what he was saying was true. And it's the first piece of evidence in the Bible, and it's the first piece of evidence for Christians that there is life after death, because Jesus has had and will have a life after death. So it gives Christians some sort of hope and solace and support that when they die, that's not the end. There's going to be something else, and they're going to go to heaven because they've been atoned. And because Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice of his life, they can then reconcile their relationship with God. What I would like you to do now, and I've put on the next slide a quick image of this for you, but I've also attached the worksheet on to show my homework. If you can print this off, that's brilliant. If you can't print it off, please don't worry, you're not at a disadvantage. What you could do is just draw a little table of similarities and differences and read the 4 accounts and just bullet point a few similarities and a few differences. But in the Gospels, in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, who I've said are the disciples of Jesus, 4 disciples of Jesus, they record and have written stories about Jesus's resurrection. And like I've said, the stories of Jesus's death and resurrection are the biggest stories reported about all of Jesus's life. They're really significant and they are really, really important. So have a quick look. Can you spot any big similarities between all 4 accounts? And are there any big differences between all 4 accounts? And then just have another little think. Why do you think that there are differences between the stories? If Matthew, Mark, Luke and John are all disciples of Jesus, why is there not one shared common message? And is there a problem with the fact that there are slightly different accounts of what happened when Jesus had been resurrected? Why could that potentially be a problem for some people? Why could that potentially be a problem for people who perhaps aren't Christians? This is the worksheet that's on Show My Homework. As you can see, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the 4 gospel stories there. If you can print it off, you can just highlight similarities and highlight differences between the 2 accounts. If you can't, you can just do a simple quick T table and bullet point these similarities and differences. Each of these can sometimes be a little bit difficult to read. So what I would suggest perhaps doing is reading it all first and trying to understand it, and then reading it and highlighting it a second time, because that way it will really help you to understand the similarities and differences. So don't try and work it out one at a time. Read them all 4 to begin with, and then go through them again and pick out those similarities and differences. So what happened next? We know that Jesus died, we know that he was crucified, and we know that he had to make that ultimate sacrifice to save humanity from original sin. But what happened after his resurrection? What was the point of his resurrection? Well, after his resurrection, Jesus spent 40 days on earth before he ascended back up to heaven to be with God. And in that 40 days, he appeared to lots of different people, including Mary Magdalene and the disciples, telling people and showing people the evidence of the fact that he had fully risen from the dead, just like he had predicted, just like he told all of those people who didn't necessarily believe that he was the Son of God. And because he was going around and meeting people and preaching and being the word of God and spreading the word of Christianity even more, all of these stories, these miraculous stories of where a man has resurrected, which has never happened before, these stories spread round really, really quickly. And it made sure that people understood that Jesus really was the Son of God, and that there were lots of different witnesses to the fact that Jesus had risen again, which of course in turn made Christianity stronger. It encouraged people to become Christians because they could see the physical evidence of the fact that what Jesus was preaching was true. Now, why is it so important? We know that this is a really significant part of Jesus' life because it's the one that's the most lengthy in the Bible, but we also know it's really significant for Christianity. But why? And it's because it's the central part of their faith. Without Jesus' resurrection, there's no life after death. Okay, without Jesus' resurrection, there's no atonement. We can't have that bridge between humanity and God. That crucifixion would not have worked. So the relationship between God and human beings would not have been able to be reconciled. It would still be broken. There would be no life after death. So actually, the ideas of Jesus' resurrection is massive, and it's really central to Christianity. Now, if Jesus had failed, then at best he was a martyr. Now, I've put martyr in bold here because martyr is a word that we've come across in Religion and Life, which I think was the second topic that we studied midway through year 10. So you should already know what that word means, but a martyr is somebody who dies for their faith or who dies for what they believe in. And at worst, he was just somebody whose delusions and confusions got him into trouble and caused him to die. So the fact that there is evidence that Jesus resurrected proves that the teachings of Christianity are central, that the teachings of Christianity are incredibly important, and it also proves, perhaps most importantly, that the relationship between God and humans is fixed again. It's been reconciled. And again, reconciliation is a word which you should know from Religion and Life and War and Peace, the two units we've previously studied. But without this happening, that relationship would have completely still been broken. And then finally, as I've put in there, it's the ultimate proof that he, Jesus, is the Son of God. It's the ultimate proof that Jesus was the incarnated version of God. And it's the ultimate proof that God will triumph over evil. Good will come out of evil. Good things will happen to those who accept Jesus into their life. I've put another video link here, and this is the evidence that we have to suggest that Jesus was resurrected. And again, this video link is going to be on Show My Homework for you to be able to easily access. Again, it's not much longer than about 90 seconds, and it's really, really good because what this is asking you to do now is realise that for some people, the resurrection is completely impossible. It's never happened since the resurrection of Jesus, and it's kind of a scientific impossibility. So for some people, the ideas of the resurrection are incredibly difficult to get their head around. And this video here is really, really good because it tells you why Jesus had to have resurrected, why there is evidence to support the fact that Jesus had resurrected. And then, like I said, the ascension of Jesus. So the word ascend comes from the root word ascend, which means to go up. And this, like I've said, happens 40 days after his resurrection. But funnily enough, even though this is a really important element of the ideas of Jesus going back up to live with God and to be with God, only Mark and Luke's Gospel finish off their story of the resurrection and ascension by telling readers that Jesus actually ascended. The other two, Matthew and John, don't even really mention the ascension. So that's quite a stark difference there, which again leads some people to question, well, why are there so many differences? But just as the resurrection is a matter of faith and interpretation, so is the ascension. There are lots of other different explanations about where Jesus went after he spent 40 days on earth. Some Christians, even different denominations, have different views on this. Mormons, for example, believe that Jesus then went over to America. So he left wherever he was and went to America. There are lots of different interpretations here, but the most widely accepted interpretation is that he ascended to be with God. And I've put there in the orangey top box a section from Luke's Gospel. So when he had led them out to the vicinity of Bethany, he lifted up his hands and blessed them. Whilst he was blessing them, he left them and was taken up to heaven. And there's lots of kind of imagery, Christian imagery and paintings and artwork to support this idea as well. I'm not going to talk through this one very much because I think this is I've just bullet pointed some really kind of key ideas here about why the resurrection of Jesus and the ascension of Jesus is really significant for Christians today. So I'm not going to talk through this one because you can read it and you can make these bullet points in your own books. But what you really need to take away from these series of lessons about the death, crucifixion, resurrection and ascension is that it's a pivotal part, one of the main parts of Christianity and the biggest part of Jesus's life, because ultimately this was the aim, this was the purpose of Jesus's life. His purpose was to restore that relationship between humanity and God, and through his crucifixion, resurrection and ascension, he managed to do that. Now, just to round off, you've got a choice of activities here. I only want you to do one out of the two. And I can imagine most of you will probably do this one because the other one is an exam style question. But it's up to you which one you want to do. This is a link grid. So here you've got you've got 12 different keywords or statements. And what you need to do here is to try and link as many of these concepts together as you can and explain the concept. So, for example, if I were doing this, I could potentially link the ideas here of incarnation and the Son. So I would draw an arrow between those two, and I would explain that Jesus was the human form of God, because that's how they link together. If I wanted to try and connect the ideas of crucifixion, I would connect that to the ideas of Pilate. So you can see crucifixion on the left-hand side there and Pilate at the bottom, because we all know it was Pontius Pilate who ultimately kind of crucified Jesus. So those two link together. Every single one of these words link. Everything links together. See if you can try and get as many links as you can and see if you can get everything to link together and explain those links. So that is task number 2. That's task number 1, but you can choose that one if you want to. And then task number 2 is an exam style question, and on the next slide I'm going to show you in a second, I've pretty much written it for you because I've given you all of the arguments for and all of the arguments against. So this would be really good 12-mark exam style question practice, because we've not actually really done a lot of exam style question practice. So this would be really good to help you. If you are going to choose to do this one, just remember that you should be writing in the style of Farm. So for against religious, my opinion. So the crucifixion is more important to Christians than the resurrection. So in your answer, you should refer to Christian teaching, so some sort of quote or biblical elements, so Matthew, Mark, Luke or John, or some sort of religious idea. You should give developed arguments to support this statement and developed arguments to go against it, and reach a justified conclusion. Now, like I said, on the next slide, I've basically written it for you. I've given you so much help here that this really won't take you very long to do at all. So you can see I've got the question at the top, the crucifixion is more important to Christians than the resurrection, and then I've given you all the different ideas to support that argument and all the different ideas to go against that argument. So you could put one or two or three of those into your own formed 12-mark question. I'm assuming that less of you will probably choose this task to do. So it really is up to you what you do, the link grid or the 12-mark exam style question. But I would urge as many of you to do this exam style question as you can, because ultimately you're going to be sitting in an exam, so the more practice you've got, the better. And if you, as so many of you are sending me pictures of your work on Show My Homework or on via email, I'm more than happy to have a quick little look at these as well and try and give them a little mark for you too. But hopefully that's cemented some knowledge, and that's really made things that you've read over the past couple of lessons make a bit more sense. Next lesson, we're going to start to have a look, if I can remember correctly, at heaven and hell. So the ideas of where did Jesus go after his ascension, and what happens to all of those people who aren't Christians? Where are they going to end up after death? So that would be one to look forward to. But well done for all your hard work so far. I know that most of you are working incredibly hard, so really, really well done.